We'll get going. Just wanted to re-highlight for everybody one more time, a couple of IT housekeeping items. I appreciate everybody's patience so far. I do think I have all of our chat functions and all of our Q&A functions, as well as our raise hand, call on you, you can speak functions active today. So don't be afraid to speak up. We have every option, I believe, available today. Like I said, Q&A function is for those specific questions that you want to shout out to the panelists that you maybe don't want to necessarily speak to. If you raise your hand, I am able to see it. And as of right now, I am able to highlight the button that says allow to talk, so we can do that if necessary. Otherwise, our chat function is awesome and has been very reliable these last couple of days. Please keep in mind that these webinars are being recorded and will be posted as soon as reasonably achievable after the conclusion of our events today. And then as of right now, like always, all are muted except for our panelists. With that, I'll turn it over to Jamie for our introductions today.
Thanks, Jared. Day 3, we have had wonderful last 2 days and now into our third. You know how exciting it is, the Ecology and Restoration webinar, when we thought about this in the beginning and where we were going to go. Thinking about connecting science, ethics, spirituality, and the action has been excellent. And we truly would like to reach out again and just say a huge thank you to Dr. Nancy and also to Dr. Mike, because you have made this so much more than even Jared and I had imagined. And so for the 4 of us to come together has been a blessing, thanks to the presentation sisters as well. I think what we'll do, we decided that we were just going to make this very sweet so we can get started. And with that, I am going to be turning it over to one of our adjuncts for the presentation sister leadership, Sister Peggy Bame. Peggy?
Thank you, Jamie.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to begin the prayer today by reading from a paragraph from the Constitutions of the Presentation Sisters. This was approved in 1987, these constitutions. And in paragraph 8 of the section entitled Nature and Purpose of our congregation, we say, the Sisters of the Presentation of Aberdeen reflect the spirit of our pioneer sisters, which was shaped by the prairie environment. This spirit is characterized by grateful dependence on God, hospitality, hope for the future, simplicity, and love for the people whose lives are rooted in the soil. So, Creator God, you formed us in our mother's womb. You formed the land and place we call home in the womb of the universe. The land and our place in turn shapes us. We are just one small part of a magnanimous universe. Call us to deepen our virtues, our gifts, and understand our place in this vast universe. Give us the courage to transform a world crying out for our attention. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Sister Peggy. Michael, I believe the floor is yours.
Thank you. Are you seeing my PowerPoint right now?
Not yet.
Am I back?
You're back. Yep.
Okay. I somehow went out for a moment. Let me try this again. Full screen and share.
There we go.
So you can see my PowerPoint now.
We see it says slide 1 of 38, but it's a white screen at the moment.
Yeah. I'm not sure what's going on with that. Let me try something else. I'm going to exit. I'm going to shut this down. Okay. Let's try this again.
Here we go.
Great. So I'm with you now?
Yes.
Okay. And from the beginning. I'm seeing a different screen. Am I advancing this time for you?
Yes.
Okay. But I'm not getting my drop downs. Let me try it one more time.
Computers are amazing in their complicated glory, but
Yeah, I don't know, a little bit of a glitch this morning, but we'll get there.
oh, for sure.
How about that?
Give it 1 sec here. Okay, we can see your screen again.
Huh. You know, I've got some really weird stuff going on with my Zoom, like crashing out. Mm. I wonder if there's something with the system here. Let me try again. Mm.
Thank you all for your patience. We'll just be 1 sec here.
Well, I hope it's only 1 sec. Oh, very strange. Okay. Keep trying. Mm.
Yeah. Mike, I'm wondering, this is why technology is so wonderful. I think it may be worth a try. Wonder if you log or close out of the webinar and then come back in just to
Yeah.
see if that reconnection does work. I'll
Okay.
recommend the host so you don't close this out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you should
Great.
be able to leave now and then pop back in.
Okay. Thanks. Back up. Let me give it a try.
Now you're host again. I had to restart the recording.
Okay. Is this happening?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. And you can hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, folks. Well, thank you for your patience, but you know, we're prairie people and we're pretty patient, so I think we can handle this. Yeah, so our work has been over the last 3 days, and it's going to continue today to keep reflecting on how we're related to our neighbor, to God, and particularly through the earth. And we've been working on some specific features of the earth to bring our attention to. And on Monday, we explored biodiversity, and Tuesday, water. Today, we're going to look at climate change. And we're doing it in that particular way of looking at some data, exploring a little bit the moral dimensions of our topics, doing some spiritual reflection, and then encouraging one another to act. And that's been this process of formation in integral ecology citizenship that hopefully we can recognize taking place in ourselves. And as we get more adept at this in our lives, we can pass it on to others. I should mention too that, you know, it can be used for self-guided formation, integral ecology. This project's been a blessing for me. I've learned so much just doing research, you know, on my own, and Jamie and Nancy, and then just to let you know that, you know, there are other chapters in the Healing Earth textbook that you can take up and do kind of a self-guided formation that to kind of further unfold just the marvels of these prairie ecosystems. We have a chapter on natural resources, and you can learn a little bit more of the interesting interplay of the hydrosphere, the biosphere, the atmosphere, the lithosphere, the four great spheres of our beautiful world. We have an energy chapter, and there you can learn more about local energy forms and processes, about trophic levels and trophic efficiencies, and a food chapter that's, I know you're working with Gus out there in Bismarck, and he's really the expert on sustainable farming practices. And we do a lot here with urban agriculture. Obviously, we're in Chicago, and we also pay close attention to the global food system. So all those things can be explored further in Healing Earth, kind of in a self-guided fashion. But today it's global climate change, and you know, it's a pretty intense topic. It's the greatest existential threat that we face on Earth, and it's not easy to go through with students who get, there is such a thing as climate change anxiety, and so it's a serious topic. But I want to start really with the beautiful prairie that and the prairie atmosphere, the prairie sky that I think most of us grew up in. And I know when I go back home, it feels like home when I get to see a beautiful sky like this and see the grasslands. So I think we really, before we launch into some of the gritty details of our climate crisis, we really need to celebrate with real gratitude this beautiful prairie world that we've been blessed to inhabit, and this sky, the prairie sky, and its winds and its clouds, and you know, who else gets to see what you know, see in this great atmosphere, and the birds, the bugs, and the sounds, and the silences, and the highs and the lows, and the stories that this land has to tell, and its secrets. It's a beautiful thing. We're going to, as we always do, start with some scientific reflection, and we're going to look at sources and impacts of climate change, and then climate change impacts on the heights itself. And we're going to welcome Nancy back, who's going to really help us understand a little bit more about climate change. So Nancy, this is your first slide.
So Michael, Nancy is in the process of logging back on.
Okay.
So do you want us to maybe reverse our process a little bit this time?
Yeah, that'd be fine. Sure.
Okay. We will do that.
Yeah.
So, I will now share my screen. All right, Jamie, you are up.
Yeah. Thanks, Jared, and thanks, Mike. So if we can just kind of go back and I think for Jared and I is reflecting on what has happened for us and the global climate change on the land and what has happened. You know, there is our beautiful seed that we put in the ground on May 24th of 2021. Again, that's truly, that seed is kind of a mystery for Jared and I because we didn't know what each one of those was going to produce or put out. And so just to have that handful in Jared's hand was really quite interesting to think that what is going to come from this and what will come from this, all the above, as we were in that drought of 2021.
So I'll jump down here. This next image is we're kind of re-highlighting David Dutenhofer. He's the gentleman with the National Resource Conservation Service office in Brown County. Prior to joining us, he had been planting seed most of the spring, grass seed. So this planting was kind of a diverse, it was significantly diverse compared to what he had been planting to date. Jamie's going to talk a little bit about Carter in the next image, but the thing that David kind of spoke to us as well was, this is going to be an interesting summer. He knew it was going to be hot. It was already hot. So we're talking about climate change today. We'll kind of bring it on with these other images, but I just want to re-highlight that even the guy who was doing the work of seeding was a little skeptical about what we were doing. Jamie?
Yeah, you know, it's really funny. I'm just going to jump back there for 1 second with David, because even in the beginning with us, I felt like he was part of our team. He would call Jared or I or text us and say, drove by the land today, you know, weeks later. And he stayed really positive with us. So that was a plus I felt coming from David as well. Don't you think, Jared? I liked that he just didn't plant and walk away. He planted and kept being a part of us. And I think he also took a little bit of pride in what was going to happen there. So up on the top, as you see this gentleman, you know, there he is. That is truly our dear friend, Dr. Carter Johnson. He was a distinguished professor at South Dakota State University. I know Jared and I have been saying SDSU, but he is also from South Dakota. Huge background. He taught in the Natural Resources Management Department at SDSU from 1989 to 2017. So to find this man and to have him join our team was phenomenal. He does reside right in Brookings, where the college is located. And here he is on our land, leaning down and checking the you know, as you see the brome grass that we have taken down and seeing how our planting is going to go, and we put lines in that. He truly was another inspiration for us. Never ever, he wouldn't let that drought take us down. He knew he was positive with us all the way through.
Thank you, Jamie. I'll take you to this next image here that focuses on August 21st of 2021. You can see now that 2 months have passed since we did our planting, and Jamie had said it right. Carter was kind of a good grounding point for us. He was a good guide. And as we progressed through the summer where we saw literally no rain, he was a good reminder just to be patient with this project. We're talking about climate change. I'm going to keep highlighting that every time I get a chance to talk today. But how did that affect the land up in Aberdeen? 2 years prior to us doing the planting, there was some flooding. Flooding followed by heat exacerbates soil salinity based on what we've learned so far. So we did plant into a more difficult season, I guess is the best way to say it. It's probably one of the hardest seasons to plant in recent memory, actually, for restoring prairies. But we show you this image just to show you that even 2 months after we planted, there's still not a lot growing. We're barely starting to see lines that are coming. And you've seen the other images when we started on Monday and again yesterday of the grasses and the forbs that have come. This drought and these climate change effects have really showed us, and I think all who've been watching the project, what faith is necessary, what time is necessary.
Thanks, Jared. And so this is just one of those special moments when Jared and I are out on the land, taking pictures, looking, checking, wondering what we're going to have pop up. And what more beautiful thing to see that looks like a cross of asters. This is on September 16th, 2022. I truly can't say any more than that's pretty obvious. That's a cross, and that's a blessing on the land, and a blessing that it'll be okay. We need to trust, have faith, and it'll be okay.
Wonderful.
We do have one more slide to show you here.
Because we went back to the that rain gauge. Again, we're talking drought, and then it turns around and we are blessed with rain. Bountiful amounts. We were worried again. Too dry, too wet, to what are we going to do? To Jared?
So we wanted to re-highlight both the image of the rain gauge, but then also this picture of our prairie. Michael and Nancy have talked significantly about, the beauty of the land, but also the diversity of it, how much more resilient it is than other biomes. And again, this is just proof. The proof is in the pudding here. You can see that despite the challenges that we saw, we still have a good growth here. I would have been curious. I don't want to find out, but what if we had only done a monoculture here? At one point, we had talked about planting soybeans to loosen up the dirt a little bit, and we decided against that. What would have happened to our land this first summer? We don't know. Fortunately, this is what we were left with and what we will continue to steward. So with that, we'll turn it back over to you, Michael, and to Nancy as well. I'll make you a host here again momentarily. There you go, Michael.
Thank you. Great. Now we're going to hear from Nancy. Thanks for that, Jamie and Jared. I never get enough of seeing those beautiful pictures from Presentation Heights. It's great. So Nancy, I think I can put up your first slide.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for your patience as I ran over to my neighbors to get a better connection. So I want to just talk a little bit about climate change and the drivers of climate change, what it means to us, and how it actually works kind of from a science perspective. We know that the burning of fossil fuels is what's putting greenhouse gases into our atmosphere, and the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is causing the globe to warm, and it really interferes with the climate system of the earth. So where exactly are we burning these fossil fuels? Certainly in transportation. So as we drive our cars, we're using fossil fuels. In jets, when we fly, we're using tremendous amounts of fossil fuels. The coal-fired electric power plants that you can see on the bottom left image, those are burning coal to convert that energy into electricity, and that's our primary source of electricity in the Midwest. And it's incredibly loaded with pollution, with carbon dioxide and sulfur oxides and nitrogen oxides, all of which pollute the atmosphere and add to the greenhouse effect. And then finally, the third biggest impact where we use fossil fuels is in agriculture. Believe it or not, you wouldn't think there'd be that much fossil fuel use in agriculture, but the big heavy equipment is very intensive. But there's also a secondary impact of agriculture. So next slide, please. I'll tell you about that secondary impact in just a minute. When we burn fossil fuels, it emits greenhouse gases, because fossil fuels are really just plants and animals that have been compressed under lots of pressure and time and been partially decomposed. And so it's made up of all of the elements that make up life, that make up animal and plant bodies, and like our own bodies. So it's primarily hydrogen and oxygen, which is water, and carbon and nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, and iron. Those are the main components of fossil fuels, and the largest of that is carbon. And that's where the energy comes from. When you oxidize it or burn it, it produces energy. So if you look at these 6 greenhouse gases, these account for the biggest portion of the greenhouse effect. And water is a greenhouse gas. And as we warm the planet with more carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, we evaporate more water, which exacerbates the problem, because then we have more water in the form of clouds that causes even a higher greenhouse effect. The 2 major culprits really are carbon dioxide and methane, and that's number 2 and 3, CO2 and CH4. And N2O is also a very important one, but it doesn't count for very much of the greenhouse gas that's emitted, but it is very, very potent, as is methane, 21 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So in other words, molecule for molecule, one methane molecule heats the planet 21 times higher than one molecule of CO2. So both of those are things that we can easily control by reducing fossil fuel consumption. Next slide, please. The way that it works, Mike is going to later talk about the very thin atmosphere that we have covering the Earth. In this drawing, it kind of exaggerates the depth of the atmosphere. It's really not that deep, but it's trying to help us imagine or understand how the greenhouse effect works. So let me just describe it, but keep in mind that Earth's atmosphere is such a thin little line around the Earth that it doesn't look anything like this cartoon. So what happens is the solar energy that comes from the sun is in the form of light, and that comes down and hits the Earth. And that light energy, when it hits something solid or even liquid like the oceans, it gets absorbed and converted from light energy to heat energy, or radiant heat energy. And that heat then is reflected back out into the atmosphere. While some of it heats the globe, a good deal of it is reflected and kind of radiated back out into the atmosphere. But as we change the composition of our atmosphere and we add more of these greenhouse gases, those greenhouse gases work just like the glass of a greenhouse. They allow the light to come in, but they don't allow the heat to escape back out, because light is in the visible portion of the spectrum and heat is in the infrared portion of the spectrum. So it's a very different form of energy, and it can't pass through the glass on a greenhouse, and it can't pass through the greenhouse gases that are building up in our atmosphere. So as a result, we get global warming, but not every part of the Earth is warming. Other parts are cooling. So it's a very scattered and kind of unpredictable impact that it's having on the Earth. But the overall impact is that we're getting warmer and warmer because that irradiance cannot leave the planet. Next slide, please. So this shows you what we know about carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, which are the three most potent and most dangerous of all those greenhouse gases that I mentioned. And if you look at the last 2,000 years, or maybe 2,000, 20 years or so, you can see that those three gases were pretty much the same over time until around 1850, when we went into the Industrial Revolution. We discovered coal and its energy capacity, and we started burning it like crazy, and that's what heated our homes. It's what we cooked with. And that's when emissions into the atmosphere began to really increase exponentially. So since 1850, our levels of CO2, for example, have risen from the 280 parts per million, which they were way back. We can measure CO2 in ice, and we can show that even more than 2,000 years ago, the levels of CO2 in our atmosphere were around 280 parts per million through the millennia. And then as soon as we started burning coal and oil, those levels have risen exponentially. As of this week, the average CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere is 417 parts per million. So we've, nearly, well, not quite doubled, but we've gone from 280 parts per million to 417. We are way past the tipping point. The tipping point for Earth's system is 350 parts per million. And if you've ever heard of 350.org, it's a big climate change advocacy group that started in little old Middlebury, Vermont, and has gone global, and it's in over 188 different countries now, advocating to get off of fossil fuels. And they want to bring us back down to 350 parts per million, which really is the tipping point. Under 350, the Earth can absorb through its plant material the CO2, but over 350, it just simply overwhelms the system. Next slide, please. You can see in this figure that as temperature rises, as CO2 rises, which is the red line, and this is a much shorter time frame, so this is just since the Industrial Revolution to current time. So the increase in CO2 in our atmosphere is tracked very closely by global temperature, which is the blue line. And even though that's very noisy and bouncy, the trend of that blue line is to track CO2. So we know that as we put more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, we understand how that traps heat into our atmosphere, and therefore we see global temperature rising. The Paris Accord, which was signed by the United States, is really trying to get all countries to stay within a 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius rise from pre-industrial time. And we're past the 1.5 already, and we're very, very close to the 2.0. And once we pass that, it's pretty difficult to reverse the trend. So that's why it's so critical that we get off of fossil fuels in this decade. And I have to say, I'm absolutely ecstatic that the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, and Biden signed it into law yesterday. We can talk a little bit more about that later, but boy, that's super hopeful. And it's aggressive. It's not as aggressive as I would like for it to be, but it's going to get us much closer to the mark. Next slide, please. We need to keep our plants, we need to keep vegetation on the landscape across the entire globe, particularly in the Amazon and the Congo, the two big lungs of the world, those two big tropical rainforests. And this is an image in the bottom of clear cutting forests, where it's called desertification, where you kind of form a desert out of what used to be lush, wet, moist, rich soil. This activity is primarily due to agriculture, but also commercial growth, building new buildings on land, and mining and extraction. So this is not only bad for biodiversity and reducing habitat for lots of different animals, but it really is hurting the greenhouse effect. It's exacerbating the problem, because plants, through the process of photosynthesis, sequester CO2 from the atmosphere into their into the chloroplasts in the cells, the green pigment in their cells, which will convert that CO2 into glucose, sugar, and then pump that CO2. It is what is the source of nectar. It's the primary building block for making nectar for pollinators, but it's also what feeds the root systems. And much of that sugar leaches out into the soil and also feeds the bacteria and the good bacteria and fungi that are helping to bring minerals to the plant. And so there's a lot of symbiotic relationship there, with plants being able to photosynthesize, produce sugar, and then kind of feed the rest of the soil ecosystem. But if we reduce plants, then we have a lot weaker sink of carbon dioxide, by the biome itself. So this is something to keep in mind as you're restoring the prairie. Much of the CO2 that's sequestered by those plants is going into those big, massive roots and feeding the soil and making the soil more rich and organic and healthy. So, not only do those big roots help to bring water into the soil and hold the soil water capacity, but they're also kind of feeding the soil organisms, if you will, through the process of photosynthesis. Next slide. So just one more time, I keep bringing this up, but these are such amazing plants, and they really are mitigating climate change. They're mitigating our greenhouse gas outputs. And it's really the massive deep roots. We think about trees, for example, because they're such big plants. We know they, plant for plant, a tree is photosynthesizing and taking up a lot more CO2 than a small prairie plant forb would be taking up. But it is deceitful that these prairie plants are actually sequestering an enormous amount of CO2 into the soil because of these massive root systems. Okay, next slide. And I want to brag a little bit about grasslands and their CO2 sequestration capacity. Grasslands account for 30% of the carbon that's stored in Earth soils. We oftentimes talk about grasslands as being the breadbasket, where we can, till them over and plant wheat. And this is happening across the world, certainly happening in our own Midwest, but also there's a big breadbasket in India and in Siberia, where these grasslands, the soil is coveted because it's so rich and deep and black and full of organic material that it's very good for growing crops. But when we plow them up to plant crops, it releases large amounts of that carbon back into the atmosphere. Unlike forests, grasslands retain the majority of their carbon in the soil following wildfires, because a wildfire is actually good and stimulates the growth of the above ground material with grassland plants. And it doesn't harm the root systems because the roots are so extensive. So the roots can kick back out a new above ground growth after a wildfire, and forests can't really recover like that. They don't have enough stored underground. We do have regenerative grazing methods for those grasslands that have been converted to rangeland. There are many rangers who are now looking at regenerative grazing methods, which really mean kind of moving your herds from parcel to parcel and letting not overgrazing, but just grazing down to the point where it's going to stimulate new grass growth. That's when you move your herd to another portion of the grassland and you let the original one that has just been grazed recover. That's called regenerative, and it really is a fantastic way to have rangeland that doesn't impoverish the rangeland. And so that's being adopted, and it's really being kind of pushed across the world. In North America, we have a recently proposed North American Grasslands Conservation Act that establishes strategies nationwide to protect and restore grassland biomes. And this regenerative grazing is one of the tactics in this act. And so this is still in the House and Senate, and we're hoping that it will be passed. I think it's going to be very important for South Dakota and for all the grasslands in North America.
Great, Nancy, thank you so much. And we've heard from Jamie and Jared, so let's get on and with some ethics. And I want to talk about, I kind of changed my mind as we've gone over these Monday and Tuesday, and I thought, we have to talk about justice, and climate justice is a big issue inside of Catholic social ethics and environmental ethics. So I want to talk about that a little bit. And we kind of get into the weeds here of environmental justice. The kind of predominant theories of justice that you would teach in class and that you would kind of drill down on, and even in formation or in a legal suit, you kind of go back to issues of justice. The three main theories of environmental justice between human beings is the distribution theory, which concerns equity and distribution of resources and risks among people. And in climate change, this is a big issue because the people that essentially responsible for the CO2 emission, the large amount, are not, are sending CO2 emission into the air and atmosphere, and poor people are suffering enormously. The harm is not distributed equitably. Theory is another important dimension of environmental justice between human beings. And this becomes really important, for instance, in Native American communities where, are we getting everybody at the table here when we're discussing climate policy or when we're discussing CO2 emissions? Respect for and inclusion of people typically excluded from the environmental and social decision-making due to their marginal group status. Justice demands that they be brought to the table. And we saw this in the Line 3 work up in northern Minnesota the last 2 or 3 years. They weren't able to stop that Line 3, but it took a long time for the Ojibwe people up there to be invited to the table in some of the decisions made about pipeline construction. Capabilities theory is another important dimension of environmental justice theory, and this has to do with the sheer availability of basic goods that human beings need to survive. And that includes typically water, making water, potable water available to human beings, making basic food available. It's called capacity, enabling the capacities of human beings to survive and thrive. And so having a clean environment and having a climate that's suitable to health, because climate change also impacts human health, that really impacts our capabilities to survive and be healthy. The other dimension of environmental justice theory that has really gotten a lot stronger within the last 10 years is the justice between human beings and the natural world. And that's called eco-solidarity theory. And that's where you really, and we started on Monday with this right away with Pope Francis, recognizing the natural world, seeing it, treating it sustainably, respecting its intrinsic value and our place within it. And the reason that has really, within the last few years, appreciation and much more work is being done on it is really due to this emphasis on the intrinsic value of nature that Pope Francis has emphasized, and others before him. We talked about Aldo Leopold. Getting our minds inside of that concept has really had an impact on an eco-solidarity theory. And frankly, the Native American scientific and cultural wisdom, the more we began to appreciate that cultural wisdom and that kind of the science of observing and living with the earth, that's had a huge impact on the development of and flourishing of eco-solidarity theory. And also there's environmental justice within typically religionists of whether you're Hindu or Buddhist or Christian or Native American. There is a sense of justice, of eco-spirituality justice. That is, we receive and care for nature with gratitude to God and the God that one believes as the giver of the gift. So that there is not just a charitable relationship between the creator and the created, but a reciprocity and justice. That this theory has gotten less traction because we're such a highly secularized society to really talk like this. But this is another area where our emphasis, attention to Native American cultures and wisdom has helped with this, and that's why Pope Francis has paid so much attention to indigenous peoples in the Amazon and elsewhere to try to lift this up. I want to just in a couple minutes talk about this recognition idea of recognizing the natural world, and particularly recognizing the atmosphere. I had earlier, I did that beautiful picture of our prairie atmosphere, and there's that thin layer that Nancy was talking about that is the atmosphere above our Earth, and the troposphere is kind of the first layer, and that's where most of our breathable areas for plants and animals. The stratosphere is that upper level. Is that, Nancy, where you get into the ozone layer? I think that's the ozone layer. And the mesosphere is really the highest sphere where we have kind of still breathable air. That Kármán line there tends to be recognized as the end of our kind of livable atmosphere. 99% of the air that we breathe and that regenerates and makes life available is below the Kármán line. So I was just playing around with this, and if we put this on its side, and then here's the Kármán line, and here's Aberdeen. And here's a road from Aberdeen to the Kármán line. And we're going to drive, we're going to leave Aberdeen and we're going to drive to the Kármán line. And I'm looking at this map here and I see there's Aberdeen, and we'd have to, now we're going to drive to the Kármán line. And we'd have to take, what is it, Highway 16 or Highway 12 that goes over to I-29? Is it 12? Yeah, so we're going to go east on 12, and then we're going to hit I-29, and maybe go down I-29 to, where I-80 crosses, and then maybe we go down to Topeka where we hit on 35, and we go 35 down to Oklahoma City and down to Austin, and then even down to Laredo. We cross into Nuevo Laredo, and maybe we go on to Mexico City. But I'm just wondering, does anybody have any idea of where in our travels we'd actually be meeting the Kármán line? Anybody want to just venture a guess? And Nancy, you can't.
Yeah, if you are able, throw some ideas into the chat. I'm curious to hear what people think. I have a guess. I'll hold it back a little bit.
Okay, let's let's get some guesses.
Carmen says Topeka.
Topeka.
Sister Mary Thomas says Topeka. Ooh, Maurice says when you hit 29.
I'm thinking that too.
I'm gonna throw my vote in with Maurice as well.
Good. Well, let's open this up. This is where recognizing nature is so important. Paying attention to it in its objective kind of reality. And it's hard. It's always been kind of hard for me to imagine how in the world could we possibly pollute everything that's above us, this enormity of the sky and the atmosphere that covers the earth. You know, how would it even be humanly possible to talk about the Anthropocene, the human impact on the atmosphere? Basically, when you get to Ortley, you're at the Kármán line. And you don't have to go to Mexico City. It's about 66 miles away. And at 9 miles, you hit the troposphere. At 30 miles, you hit the stratosphere, and then at 66 miles, you're at the top of the mesosphere. So next time, when you're looking up into the sky and you're just thinking that atmosphere goes on infinitely, it really ends at Ortley up there. And I think I don't know if there's anybody from Ortley in our crowd, but you are the top of the atmosphere for us. And there it is. If you want to put it in these terms, where the troposphere, the stratosphere, the mesosphere. Now, with this kind of recognizing the reality of the atmosphere, now I can really understand how it could become overheated and how it could become polluted, because it doesn't take long to drive to Ortley. So that, I think, what Pope Francis insists, and ecologists like Nancy insist, we have to get our children out into nature. They have to see, they have to touch, they have to smell, and we have to try to get beyond these abstractions and really get, envision what it is that we're talking about when we talk about climate change and affecting the atmosphere. Let's take some time now with that information of climate change impacts on the heights and the information that Nancy has given us, and our travels to Ortley. Let's reflect a bit on what all this kind of does to our insides. And we asked, we're talking about maybe finding meaning in the prairie climate and how changes in the climate might be affecting us spiritually. Nancy's going to talk about climate awe, and I'm going to try a little bit of a centering prayer project, but let's start with Jamie and Jared.
All right, Michael, I'm going to reclaim the host here. And as I do that, I did just put into the chat just that we are running a smidge behind our time. And we just wanted to invite those. Our webinar has the capability to actually run past 11. So if we do go past that, obviously we're going to do our part and complete our presentation. But for those that are able to stay on, we would certainly welcome and invite you to do so as well. All right, Jamie, it should be coming up here.
Great. Thanks, Jared. Thanks, Mike and Nancy. So, we have been talking about this is never, ever just about our farmers and ranchers. It's also about us in the urban areas as well with our gardens. But this one really sent a message to Jared and I when we were traveling, our back and forth with Aberdeen. And this was, of course, in early spring of 2022. And as you see, the snow is still in that ravine with a little bit of the water, and you see the dirt on there. And I guess, what really hits me or bothers me most is that that beautiful land to the right is just barren. And so, you know, the Midwest, we are always known for our winds. We're the prairie. We have winds all the time. And we've had some really crazy over the top winds. And this is an example of losing that topsoil with the winds. And now it's sitting over there on the side of the snow that will melt down that and not back in the field. And that also can happen in your gardens, actually in your backyards too. It's really important to keep, as we keep saying, a cover crop. Those words, again, to someone that knew nothing about what a cover crop was, that's leaving your vines or your leaves from your garden, from your tomatoes or your cucumbers. And I think that's the part that we have to remember too, how we can help. We are doing well because it's beautiful soil, but we're losing the topsoil when we have these horrible winds that we have across the state. Jared.
Thank you, Jamie. All right. So next thing I'm going to talk about two situations that happened here in the Midwest recently. As you can see here on the slide, this is actually a video shot by Jamie's husband, Greg. He gave us the authority to share this today. I don't think I'm going to be sharing this on, but I do want to share the video. Back in May of this year, this was the leading cloud of the derecho that came through most of South Dakota and specifically through Sioux Falls. You can see this cloud had a really green, ominous tone. As Nancy said a couple of days ago, you're going to see a lot more intense storm activity as climate change is realized. Like I said, this is the leading edge of it. What actually followed this, and I think many of us experienced it, but in case you didn't, we had this big cloud, we had the green sky. What came behind it was a lot of wind. Surprisingly enough, not a lot of rain. And within that wind, there was dust from Kansas, there was dust from Nebraska, and that dust made it night. I remember my wife getting home about 5 p.m. that night, and at 5:10, it turned dark, and it was almost like we had a hurricane going through. But this video just shows kind of the how ominous really everything looked. The second part of what I wanted to talk about, I'm gonna leave this image here because I think it speaks, that green is just, it speaks crazy to what was going on. But I also wanted to highlight something I saw this morning. CBS Mornings had a article just this morning. They were talking about Lake Mead and Lake Powell and how devastating the current mega drought is in the Southwest United States. I know that's not the prairie, but I bring it up because in the last year, they said that Lake Powell has dropped 160 feet. There are archways of stone that are now visible. There are Indian climbing spots that are now visible that haven't been visible for over 70 years. And so I'm seeing and hearing that. There's also an ethical debate about how do they just continue to drain it and make it a national park. So there's that piece of it. But I bring it back to the prairie, and what I'm hearing on both ends of this is that the world is no longer just whispering to us, it's screaming, I need help. And I think that when we talk about spirituality and finding meaning in the prairie climate, I think the prairie climate has a huge role in how we can help all of these other biomes. So I guess I feel like in a unique way, Jamie and I have been blessed to kind of steward this little project, but there is a bigger connection, and that's where I find meaning in this work.
Great. Thank you.
I will return host to you, Mike. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I think we're going to be okay with time. So everybody, you can, I think, kind of relax. I think we're going to be okay. Nancy has offered to share some of her reflections on climate and what's exciting her right now.
Thank you, Mike. You know, it is hard to kind of talk about climate change from the perspective of awe and, you know, connecting to God. Although big weather events like the one that you experienced in the spring certainly have an element of that. What I want to talk about is what really gives me hope and what kind of keeps me going, pushing for our world to get off of fossil fuels and get onto clean energy. It's the victories, the small ones and the big ones, and it's the activists, the grassroots people that are on the ground that are pushing this, and that's really what's driving legislation. So, activism, like you see on the bottom part of this screen, on the bottom left is the water protectors, the Lakota people who were fighting against the Dakota Access Pipeline at Standing Rock and well beyond Standing Rock, not wanting that pipeline to go right through their sacred grounds and into their watershed and under the rivers where they, get their water from. Their work made a difference. Their voices made a difference. It moved the needle on policy change and legislation. And the same with the People's Climate March that you see down here in the bottom right. That occurred several years ago in New York City, but it was the largest environmental activism movement on the planet ever. And that continues to build. I mentioned 350.org, which you see here kind of in the middle on the right. That organization, you might want to look it up. They have such terrific coordination across the world on events and marches that really raise the bar and lift voices about how climate change is disproportionately impacting the poor, the marginalized, indigenous people, and youth, because the youth are, growing up in this environment and have nothing to look forward to except for environmental disaster after disaster after disaster if we don't get off of fossil fuels. And of course, Greta Thunberg is really become an international hero, especially as a leader of the youth, because she is so well-spoken, well-educated, understands the situation, and doesn't mince her words. She points fingers and names names. So it's very uncomfortable, but I think she's right. And I think she's honest and authentic. And that's what really moves the youth. But I do want to give a huge, big shout out to these three old white men who we like to, poke fun at, old white men. But these guys have worked tremendously hard at putting together a bill that could be accepted by both parties, by the House, by the Senate, by the Democrats and the Republicans. And the Inflation Reduction Act, if you haven't read much about it, you really should look into it. It's big. It's $700 billion to decrease US greenhouse gas emissions by 40%. Below the 2005 levels, which are much lower than they are today, and to do this all within this decade. It also has a lot of other really terrific provisions, like reducing big pharma's ability to overprice, life-saving drugs, et cetera. But okay, even though this act on the greenhouse gas and clean energy side doesn't go as far as the Build Back Better bill did, it still has teeth, and it's really hopeful. I think it's something that we can build on. It's something that we can have hope for. And, I really appreciate Schumer's ability to work within the Democrats and then across the aisle, and the same with President Biden and John Kerry. They did great work to get this, and they weren't the only three, but they really led this act. And I think it's important for us to kind of get behind these efforts and do our best to contribute, just like we do our best to contribute to what Pope Francis is calling us to do, to be active, to take a stand, to reduce our own environmental footprints, to teach this in our classrooms and to our own family, and then to live it ourselves. And And that's what I think the federal government is really trying to do. They're trying to facilitate that both with carrots and sticks, if you will. You know, from the policy side, there's money going into it, and there are, you know, tighter regulations on fossil fuel emissions. So these are things that give me hope, and I think they're real, and I think they're really important, and they're things that we can complain about there not being enough, but it is more productive for us to get behind them and push them forward with our own efforts, you know, in our own homes and workplaces.
Thank you, Nancy. I'd like to take, I see that we're at 10:41, and I'd just like to do something until 10:45. So just about 3 minutes, if I can get this to work. And then we'll still have 15 minutes to kind of wrap up with some action ideas. I want to see if I can,
I'm going to give you back the hosting capability.
okay.
Remember that when you share your screen, I don't know if you're going to do your videos now, but make sure to click share sound, that button that we looked at before.
Okay.
You should be host again. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know if this is going to work because of the problem we had earlier, but I'll ask you to do this. So we may not be able to do it at the moment, but I'll ask you to do it. Maybe you can do it tonight or this evening. I mean, this afternoon or this evening, but I'll get my screen back up here. So can you see the western meadowlark there? I'm sorry, it is the North Dakota state bird, so it's not a pheasant, it's a meadowlark. But you know, there's nothing like the sound of the meadowlark on the prairie, and there's no meadowlark without a beautiful atmosphere and a beautiful air to enjoy it. There's a wonderful poem by Garrett Merritt that was written in 1880. It's called Lark Ascending. And if you get a chance, read the poem Lark Ascending. And even better, there is, I know that you're all probably familiar with the Vaughan Williams piece, Lark Ascending. It's one of the most recorded and beautiful orchestral pieces that we have. Vaughan Williams composed it in 1914. It was violin and piano, but then in 1921 he made it violin and orchestra, and that's the one that you most often hear. I was going to play about 4 minutes of it, just let us kind of drench our spirits into it. But the totality of the piece is about 14 minutes. But you might try this when you get a chance to use it as a form of centering prayer. You know, in centering prayer, you usually maybe have a word that you kind of center your consciousness on. And then you let your mind kind of become drenched in the movement of your spirit. And when your mind, like Thich Nhat Hanh said, when your monkey brain starts to move off of the word, you just gently bring yourself back to the word and let your spirit get closer to God and drenched in God. I just invite you to put the meadowlark in your imagination, replace the word with a meadowlark, and then have Vaughan Williams piece playing lightly in the background, and imagine that meadowlark moving through the atmosphere and through the earth, and really joining. You've got the prayer of the meadowlark, like Thomas Aquinas suggested to us, and Pope Francis, that the animals give glory to God. And our prayer to the meadowlark, in a way of Vaughan Williams responding and trying to replicate and respond to the beauty of the meadowlark, it's a real intersection that can enter our spirits. So I'd suggest that you give that a try. it'll help you enter into the God's presence in the prairie through the North Dakota State Bird. Sorry. So we've reflected spiritually, and now we've got a few minutes left now to think of some practical ways that we can act to respond to climate change, and Nancy's got us a start on that. There's more that certainly, and here I'm going to rely on Nancy and Jared and Jamie, whatever you'd want to add to or suggest to us as things we can do. I know I tell my students, lower your meat consumption and protest. But Nancy and Jamie and Jared, what are some of your action suggestions?
Yeah, these are some ideas that I put up there. I agree with you, Mike, that reducing meat in your diet, it is a very environmentally sustainable thing to do, and it helps promote more plant growth on the planet. Eating organically grown fruits, vegetables, and grains is super important, and eating locally grown things is really important. This is because of the combined impact of high intensive agriculture with lots of chemicals, has on the planet. Reducing your carbon footprint. And by the way, you can use a carbon calculator. If you look it up on the web, there's lots of different carbon calculators. You can kind of plug in your everyday habits, driving to work, and how often you take a vacation to Europe or whatever, how often you fly, and what temperature you set your thermostat. All these different things can be plugged in, and you can kind of calculate your own carbon footprint. But the obvious things of reducing your footprint is to drive less, fly less, and do more walking and biking or carpooling if you are a distance from work and you have to get there some way, if mass transit isn't available. Thinking about driving a car that's more efficient, like a hybrid or an electric car. And of course, then you have to have a non-fossil fuel source of electricity to refuel or recharge those cars. Composting is remarkably helpful. If you tend to throw your food waste and kitchen scraps and yard landscape waste into the trash and it gets hauled off into the landfill, it's going to get buried by lots of trash and become anaerobic. It will decompose over time, but when it decomposes without oxygen or anaerobically, it kicks off methane. And you remember that methane is a very potent greenhouse gas that's 21 times more potent than CO2. So it's way better to decompose your compost aerobically. Do it kind of openly in your backyard, toss it around so the air gets in there, and then you have a nice compost topsoil enricher that you can use in your own garden. So that's much more efficient. It's a much lower carbon footprint. You can purchase clean energy from your home. If you look at the distributor of your electricity and you call the company, you can get clean energy. Solar panels is another way to go. You folks don't have a lot in the way of shade. You have great sun out there, and those roofs might be able to hold some solar panels, and the subsidies are coming in. Right now is a good time to get solar panels because of government subsidies at the federal level. And this new act that was just signed in is going to even provide more subsidies. So something to think about, right now. Weatherizing your home, replacing old appliances when they need replacing, making sure that you do some research and getting energy, water efficient appliances as well. Of course, the old reduce your consumption, reuse materials, and recycle. That's from the 70s, and it's more true now than it was then. And then finally, divesting from fossil fuels. And I saw in the chat that the Aberdeen sisters are really moving forward on that and have made great great progress. That's got a lot of impact. The more organizations and even individuals that divest from fossil fuels, the better. Banking locally is important too, because local community banks tend to invest in the communities rather than in, big fossil fuel companies, for example.
Thanks, Nancy. Jamie and Jared, you've got a couple minutes. Do you have anything you want to add from your experience?
Of course we do.
So Jared and I decided that we wanted to take just a few minutes for us to talk about all the riches that we've enveloped here in the last 18 months of our time. We have different titles of companies that we have actually worked with. I'll just kind of go down a couple of them here. Again, we want to thank Dr. Nancy Tuckman and Dr. Michael Shook for giving us just kind of giving us a little more fire to burn in us. And then Loyola University in Chicago. And David Dutenhofer, he was our gentleman that helped us with our planting, and we really want to thank him, from the NRCS, which is the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Natural Resources Conservation Services, and Carter Johnson. Again, he was so helpful in the very beginning stages and taught Jared and myself more than I can ever say. And again, from South Dakota State University here in Brookings. And then Ben Lardy was also a gentleman that helped us when came out on our property to give us some help with some names of some things we didn't know what we had growing on there, which is great. And then another gentleman, Judge Jessup from the Grassland Coalition, covers the entire state of South Dakota. Lots of miles that man puts on and does a great job with the Leopold Award. A fantastic group organization of ranchers and farmers that come together on that. Jared?
Yep, and then I'll add in here, I'll talk about the other group of people. Beth Pigish, who is the Integral Ecology Director with I apologize, I don't have the group, but she's with the sisters group that are based in La Crosse, Wisconsin. She's their Integral Ecology Director. And we came across her by happenstance, but she then connected us with Carolyn Cromer, who happens to be an ecologist. She works with the Sisters of Charity based out of Kentucky. And we meet, I think, quarterly with their group. Jeff Zimprick is the former head of the NRCS here in South Dakota. Holly Meyer is currently heading up with the city here in Sioux Falls. She's the sustainability coordinator. Cindy Zank is the current director of the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition. And then Pete Bauman, like all these other individuals, he works with the SDSU Extension Office, but he's also a member of both the Grassland and the Soil Health Coalition as well. With that, we wanted to name these people. We wanted to name these different groups. And the call to action that Jamie and I wanted to leave everybody with is use this network. This is the network we have also reached out to. All it takes is a call. These people are willing to work. They're willing to have you work with them. It is an amazing group of people, nonprofits, different offices that are both here locally and some nationally. But again, it's just more of a highlight to really also say thank you to these people. They've given us so much on the course of the last 18 months. And then I also wanted to leave you with this last little bit. I put the Sisters of the Presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary at the bottom. We have all these great entities, but you can call us now too. We can start connecting you to these people too. So don't leave us out of the mix if you don't know what to do or where to start. Give Jamie and I a call. We can help you on your journey as well.
Yeah, and if we can't help you, we will find someone that will help you.
That's great.
It's
so Michael, do you need the host back?
Just one more time, please.
Okay.
We've got 5 minutes.
You should have the host back now.
Thank you. What I wanted to just a final remark is how We've been working on land restoration, and but it's really is our own restoration. I know that Nancy and we've really been restored. Relationship with Jamie and Jerry, weekend we spent with the Presentation Sisters, it's very restorative. And each time you go into these issues and turn the soil again, water, and explore more about water, and Jamie and Jared, you're going to learn so much more about the land. Each time it's a restoration. So there's so much more we could explore on biodiversity and water and climate change, but that's okay. That's part of the journey. We just keep learning and restoring our spirits as we go forward with hope. I wanted to just give also Nancy a chance, if you don't mind, Nancy, to just give us also a final thought of your own before we leave.
Thank you, Michael. My final thought is that this 3 days for me has been really enriching, and also gives me a lot of hope to see what the Presentation Sisters are doing. And to see people like Jamie and Jared, who have been in the healthcare industry their entire lives, it is sort of as a second chapter in their professional careers, take on something that they probably never, I don't even know how you guys got these jobs. I don't know how they even hired you. You didn't really have very much experience or expertise. And it's so cool because you've really had your own, I think, personal kind of spiritual transformation in reconnecting with the earth and with this habitat that you've both grown up in your whole lives and raised your own families in. So having that connection and seeing it happen in people who have always respected nature but never really been close to it or known enough about it to really have that deeper appreciation, for me, has been really wonderful. Thanks.
Thanks, Nancy. And with that, we'll turn it over to, I believe, Sister Peggy.
Thank you, Michael. My prayer both is a prayer that it's a prayer to hold up both the land, the people, and God's role in our lives. And so I invite each one of us in this prayer to put your hands up like this as a gesture of holding up and holding, being held with all those that we pray for right now. We hold our brothers and sisters who suffer from storms and droughts intensified by climate change. We hold all species that suffer. We hold our grasslands and all of our natural resources as sacred. We hold in our hands our global and national leaders delegated to make decisions for life. We hold corporations accountable so that their decisions be ethical and contribute to making our planet more livable. We hold our presenters, Doctors Michael and Nancy, with gratitude for sharing their spirituality, their professional knowledge, their wisdom. We hold all that we have learned during this seminar within our hearts. And we hold up all who made these 3 days possible, especially Jared and Jamie. We hold up all of those who participated in this seminar. And Creator God, remind us to take time to celebrate with gratitude the beauty of all creation. And finally, Creator God, challenge us to be agents for transformation of our own lives, of our personal relationships, and our relationships with all of creation. Amen.
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 Thank you, Sister Peggy.
Oh, thank you.
Well, as we close, Jamie, is there anything you want to say before we would close out here?
No, just everyone, thank you for coming on and sharing your time with us, and hope you take away lots of great information from Dr. Nancy and Dr. Mike.
And I think I've seen it here in the chat, but I'll say it out. Thanks aren't enough, both for Dr. Nancy, for Dr. Michael, to be in attendance today, but also for all those who have attended. Thank you so much. Have a great
Thank
rest
you.
of your week.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Sister Mary.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
We'll see you again sometime.
Yes,
Like
we
to
will.
get back out there and dig in the dirt with you guys.
Okay.